Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Shame Free Sex podcast. Today, I am here with my amazing friend, Alex, and we are going to be talking about sexuality and what that means, what that can look like, what that could mean for you. And this is so much more than just what we might think of when we think of gender preference as our sexuality. What do you identify as? It's so much more than that. So I'm just excited to have a fun little conversation today. And to get us started, Alex, what do you think sexuality is? What does sexuality mean to you?
So, to me, how I've always visualized sexuality is that it's an energy and that it's how we perceive ourselves sexually and then how we're communicating that to others sexually. So, you're like you mentioned like sexuality, a lot of people will refer to it whether that is in reference to who they're attracted to or who they're not attracted to or even how they feel in their gender fluidity. And I think that all is encompassed under the realm of like how we perceive ourselves sexually. So whether or not we identify as one thing or another, and then how we communicate that to others through sexual expression, which would be whether or not we're attracted to women, men, everyone, no one, whatever. Because we
Whatever.
also have our asexual people out there we got to take note of, you know?
Of course,
And
yes.
that's still their sexuality. That's still their communication of it. Their communication is just a little quieter than others. And then there's some people who are more vibrant in their communication, and those are the sex crazy animals.
Yes, I love that. I love just how sexuality can be kind of, I think everything what we are talking about here today is kind of up to perception and
hmm
interpretation, and what sexuality means to myself or Alex could be completely different than what it means to you. And yeah, I think like for anyone who's wanting to start to connect with this part of themselves and perhaps hasn't explored it or considered what their sexuality even is, as kind of I love to consider it as kind of like a living breathing part of ourselves.
I completely agree. Like it's a part of ourselves. Like everyone has like this duality within them, and there's this part of Alex and this part of Brielle and this part of Alex and then this part of Brielle, and everyone has multiple different versions of themselves that exist. Some are more prevalent in different times of our life, hence why children aren't that sexually explicit because they're children. But then you become a teenager and biologically hormones start to circulate, and then all of a sudden you're introduced to this completely new part of yourself, and that's your sexual being. Everyone has one. They all communicate themselves a little bit differently though, and that's when sexuality comes into play. Sexuality and sex to me are different, like completely,
Yes.
because sex is the act of communicating sexuality. It's a communication between two individuals or more, whatever floats your boat, but
Yeah.
still it's the action of it. But sexuality is the aura, the energy, the
Mm-hmm.
self, the thing that we actually have and hold within ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, our sexuality doesn't have to involve anyone outside of ourselves if we aren't choosing to partake in sexual experiences. And yeah, I just love sexuality. I love being in my sexuality, being present and in whatever that feels like for me at any given
Mhm.
moment. I know you have this concept of the sexual spectrum essentially that you've spoken with me about before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I feel like to me when I visualize it, like illustrating the sexual spectrum, it's like how do I want to put it? What's a good thing to categorize the spectrum as? I guess it's just more of like a
Like a
color
win.
wheel.
Oh, a color wheel. Okay.
Like a color wheel where it's like we like it closes in, maybe not a color wheel, but like some sort of like thing where it like a fan, like fan closes and then it opens, and then as it's opening and closing, um losing my train of thought, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're
Sorry,
so
I'm
fine.
losing my train of thought. I feel like I have like thoughts and then I can't actually like
I completely
articulate what's going on in
understand.
my brain, and I'm
Yeah.
just like Where am
We
I
have,
going
I
with
think you've
this?
described it to me before as like a narrowing.
Yes.
We could be narrowing in, which essentially, from my understanding of what Alex has shared with me previously off the camera, is that this can be a time where we seek deeper intimacy. So what our sexuality is at that given time is a seeking for something perhaps a lot more emotionally connected, a lot more intimate in realms perhaps beyond just the sexual experiences itself. And then the broader view is when perhaps we might be interested in exploring more casually or just in different ways maybe.
Precisely, like she hit my points exactly. She basically communicated what my brain was thinking. Thank you, Brielle,
Of course,
because
Alex.
my brain had a brain fart for a minute. But yes, so the fan closes, and then we're maybe just a little bit more closed off because that's when monogamy is more important to us. That's what we're seeking. That's what we crave sexually. That's what our sexual being is, just that's what we need to feed it essentially. So it closes, it narrows, it's one thing, it's one line, and that's monogamy, you and the person of your choice. And then when it opens, you have all those folds, and you have all of them, and all these folds are just different options and avenues for how you can explore your sexuality, which can mean multiple partners, and or really whatever you want it to be. But in how I'm visualizing it, it's more of like multiple partners, and that there are some people who don't thrive in monogamy, and maybe it's polyamory, but or maybe it's just being an individual and very free spirited person, where the idea of monogamy feels claustrophobic to some people. And some people have negative affiliations with that type of living. But I feel like no matter what, they're still, as Brielle would like to say, living their truth.
Living their truth.
So either way, whether it floats your boat or not, still people are still going to do it. So that's the sexual spectrum. It's the fan opening and closing.
The fan opens and closes like your legs can open and close if you choose to do so.
If
If
you
you want to be in a
choose.
straddly position, yeah, I love that. And yeah, I would say, like, I would imagine that even for anyone listening today who has been married for 40 years or is in a very long-term monogamous relationship of any sort, I think you could still explore this concept of the fan and what that could look like for you. Perhaps there's times when you're interested in exploring more in the realms of kink or exploring BDSM, and perhaps that is a more widespread opening of the fan rather than those moments where you really want that intimate soul connection that so many of us seek through sex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like the narrowing of the spectrum can also like can be applied to positions too, where like people will refer to missionary as like vanilla, but I'm like, sometimes it's simple, sometimes that's just where connection is best, what's the word, fostered.
Fostered.
So, but then when you open it up more, then that's whenever you're exploring different avenues, like Brielle mentioned,
Yeah.
with different things, and that exploratory type of living is wonderful, because when fans open up, then air is blown around, and then we feel good. It cools us off on these hot summer days.
It cools. It is hot out. It is very hot
It's
here.
so hot
It's
here.
really hot here. Yeah. So we need a little fan moment. And
Sometimes that's what we need. I'm turning off my
yeah,
phone. It's on.
me, Alex got on the podcast without turning her notifications off.
Sorry, guys.
OMG. No, just kidding. Okay. Anyway, so we've talked a little bit about just this overarching theme of sexuality and how that can mean a lot of different things for anyone listening, and I like to think of it as like who you are as a sexual person when you're in your sexual energy. And so I'd love for us to consider, I think all my questions for us today, I don't even have an answer. It's like an endless, like, there's
Abyss.
endless abyss of answers and possibilities and contradictions and all the things. But I'd love for us to consider, like, what is the purpose of sexuality? Is there a purpose to sexuality? Why is this a thing in our lives? Why do you choose to incorporate and embrace sexuality in your life?
I would say that, like I discussed earlier, like every individual has these parts of themselves. We have a part that it's not even just with sex. There's a part of ourselves that our family sees, and that's very familial focused. And then there's a different part of ourselves that our friends see, and that's very amicable and fun and lets a little bit more loose. And then there's parts of ourselves at work. Like we have different versions of ourselves that that come out in these different situations, but inherently and spiritually we all have this part of ourselves that is sexual. And I feel like that exists because, well, one, biology. I mean, sex is a natural part of just nature in general. It's a natural biological instinct. There are times of the month that women crave sex. Like, it's just ingrained in our blood and bones. But spiritually, we've had to adapt to communicating that through various ways. And sex has evolved time and time again throughout the years. And I think that it has to exist for people. Everyone has a sexual part of themselves because of this evolution, but it's also just because spiritually it is what connects us with other people. Like, sex is often affiliated with romance, primarily with romantic relationships. So without sex, you sometimes can't build the intimacy and the deep romantic connection that you crave in someone else and having a partner. um when in my opinion, I think romantic relationships are the most intimate relationship that you can formulate with someone, and plays a huge role in that. Without sex, without that communication, there's no way that you can get to know someone else on a deeper level. Or
Such, yeah, an internal intimate
yeah,
level, yeah, that likely is you're not likely sharing with the majority of the people in your life,
mm-hmm.
I would presume. Yeah. And
Because
go ahead,
oh,
queen.
sorry. But spiritually, like, we're all balls of energy, and that's kind of like our soul, somewhat, is what how I see it, how I illustrate it. And whenever these balls of energy, um when they want to, I guess, bond with someone else, or when they're attracted to someone else's energy and aura, like, sex is that physical bonding moment in romantic relationships. And then how I also see things is, like, if you're like making a friend amicably, then even talking about sex, our sexual part of ourself comes out. Where, like, with my friends, like, girl talk is affluent. Like, we're always talking about things, like, there's no filter. And I feel like that's still just a part of our sexual self that, like, we're letting loose and feeding just in the communication of talking about it and bonding about it with your friends, even though
Yeah.
you're not actually doing the act. But still, that imploring that sexual part of yourself is just so natural that it comes out even in friendships that you're close with as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people likely are still confusing or have confused in the past, is that sexuality means that you want to have sex in that given moment, or it means if you're talking about these things or feeling in your sexual energy, that means you're horny, or like you are about to I'm going to start humping my chair that I'm sitting in right now. And I think that's something that perhaps if we changed our perceptions about that and the way that we are just considering how we can actually be in our sexuality and be in our sexuality and use that for other things in our lives, and that doesn't necessarily mean that right now we're turned on, or that doesn't necessarily mean if you're talking about sex with your friends that you want to sleep with your friends.
Precisely.
It's so vast, and there's so much to be said for sexuality as a whole. And in the realms of just like purpose, I feel like sex, the act of sex, and of course sexuality in general, can actually be used for so many different areas of our lives. What we can explore in sex can actually be carried over
Mm-hmm.
into other parts of our lives. So I'd love if we could explore that a little bit. Even just, I know that comes up a lot for people who are in the realms of kink and BDSM, and how they can use those experiences to get better at setting boundaries at work, or speak up for themselves more, say no when they need to say no, whether that means in the bedroom or that means in the boardroom, or even just to your kids and say, no, I need a moment for myself. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you, because I also think that an upbringing of an individual is often also communicated through their sexual wants, needs, or ad- what adverses them with sex. Where, like, in an upbringing with someone, where if someone people joke about, like, girls with daddy issues, like, want to call their partner daddy in bed, where people joke about it, but like that's genuinely something that can happen with an individual. And when that happens, sex is the way that that individual is finding out that maybe there's underlying abandonment issues or just something going on that they need to identify and work on to enhance themselves as an individual, because our upbringings do not define us, but they do have a really really crucial role in how we want to define ourselves moving forward once we become young adults and as we enter the adult life, because the child version of you is obviously going to be incredibly different as the adult version of you. And I think sex helps us with that. Like when you mentioned when people implore different things with kinks or whatnot, it's someone's attraction or what's the word thinking of
Attraction
attraction
to,
attraction to a kink, or
oh, but just
them
draw,
yeah,
inner
or
draw.
whatever, or if they feel a little weirded out by a kink. I think that that can give us a clue in as to how they were raised, what
Hmm.
values were imposed upon them when they were younger, or what values they're carrying into themselves as adults, and all those sorts of things. Because then that's how you get to know that person deeper. That's how that person functions.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or
and just like anything else in our personalities or our relationship choices, whether that means relationships with a friend, family member, or a romantic relationship, we are carrying everything that we have experienced throughout our lives, and every story that has been ingrained in us. And of course, that shows up when it comes to something like sex, and what we're interested in the bedroom is likely not even a choice as much as it's kind of a natural instinct to feel drawn towards something for some part of our souls or our bodies are feeling the need to explore that, and sex can be such a lovely avenue to do so.
I completely
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah. And I know there's times where that can always be shifting and changing. I think back to some of I had a nice probably long year where I was often wanting to explore sex in kind of an angry way, in a more aggressive way, because of some of the things I was experiencing in my life at the time and some of the things coming up for me. And then, at any moment that could switch, and I am now no longer interested in some of those things that I was exploring at the time. And that brings up such a lovely idea to be okay with your sexuality really changing. And it's a very fluid thing that can be shifting at any given moment. So, what you perhaps liked last week or last year or 10 years ago, you're not necessarily going to be interested in where you are at in your sexuality now, because our sexuality is just a part of us. And as we grow and change, more than likely, so does our sexuality.
I completely agree with you, because as we embark on different things in our lives and as we kind of go through different obstacles, encounter different challenges, it makes us grow as a person. And then as we grow, that sexual part of ourself is also growing, just because as a whole, we're moving forward through this life journey we're on, I guess. So I think that that's why often there's a stigma for teenagers who want to go have sex, and I feel like I get really annoyed when people put down or belittle a young person who wants to start experimenting or kind of getting to know the sexual part of themselves, because it's completely natural. Because we start hitting puberty at some point, and that's biologically when things start circulating. And then when that happens, then there's a connect and a communication with this spiritual part of ourselves that is starting to crave something, starting to want something, starting to seek something out in someone else. You start finding yourself attracted to people. And I feel like um, often some people believe that kids shouldn't, teenagers who are kids, but more like kind of like adults in training, how I would see
Mm-hmm.
it. I feel like with 16, 17 years old, like, yeah, you're a little adult in training. Like, you're becoming a person, you have an opinion, you're an adult in the eyes of the court legally. So, therefore, you have some say in how you want to start conducting yourself, how you want to start exploring yourself. And so people often be like, sex is not for kids, or we're rating things on movies and television for sex scenes and caution, trigger warning, like you don't want your kids seeing this. And we're referring to our private parts to 12-year-olds in sex ed as what would they call it for you? I think they literally just called it a PP for me.
They probably did not. Yeah, especially in the South in the United States, they do not tend to give you much as far as sex education goes. And in fact, you can actually opt out of it
That's
if
so
your beliefs
weird.
differ, which that ends up affecting all of us as well because everyone knows teenagers are more than likely having sex, and when we aren't actually taught about how to be safe and mindful, we're just kind of living in this imaginary world that we're just not going to have sex if we don't talk about it.
And I think that's just so toxic. Like, I just wish that we could normalize sex more, because if we normalize sex more for these very new sexually eager individuals, these teenagers that are just very new to the world. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know what they like and what they want, and they are just trying to figure it out for themselves. And I feel like that's like that rawest form of our sexual self is such a unique time of living, and I wish that people would destigmatize it a little bit, just because it's going to change, but over time it's going to become something new. Like you said, the thing that we liked
Mm-hmm.
last week or even yesterday, maybe we don't like today. And I feel like there's something to be said about looking back about how we perceive sex, what we wanted from sex whenever we first started as like the like newcomers into sex and our
Mm-hmm.
sexuality. And I think there's something to be said about that being a really special time of life. So yeah, I get really irritated whenever, because the sexual journey starts probably at
Mm-hmm.
16, 15 for some people, and that's okay. I just think we need to stop freaking out about it a little bit,
Yeah.
because sex is seen as an adult activity, and it somewhat is, but if these adults in training want to start figuring it out, then we got to let them.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I went off on a tangent there.
No, I think it's really important to talk about, especially if we're considering our sexuality to be this component of our self, this idea of ourself. Puberty essentially would be when this aspect of ourselves, this sexuality, is beginning to wake up, and if we aren't able to talk about it, receive really great education about it, that's going to affect overall the rest of our lives when it comes to sexuality unless we take the time to really go back in and repattern our thoughts around sex and change the stories that we tell ourselves perhaps about experiences that we have. And so yeah, I it's kind of off topic, but not really. It's not really at all.
Well, especially with the topic of sexuality, where we are in the last 5 years, I feel like since 2020, I don't know if you agree, like I feel like we have started to evolve very quickly as a society, where now we're seeing more of the queer community come out and vocalize themselves. We're seeing people who feel very gender fluid or agender come out of the woodwork and say I'm here, I'm right here, I've been here the whole time, but I'm not going to silence myself anymore. Just in the last 5 years, we've had the queer community blow up with support, but also just communion.
Communion.
And so I feel like because of that, now we're seeing young parents who we're seeing kids know about this now in social media. For example, my younger brother, who is exposed to more and more gender fluid media and just more of a normalization of the LGBTQ plus a community. We're seeing that now it's normalized in their brains as young newcomers in society. And so to them, they want to explore it. And that means for them figuring out what sexuality is for them. So now we're seeing an emergence of young people not saying type
Path.
straight is not the original just go-to path. It's genuinely, now we have all these avenues opened up where you're in the middle, you can go down this trail, this trail, this trail, or this trail, and genuinely they're all open, and no one's going to assume that you're just going down this trail anymore, except for some parents who don't want to believe kids that young, because they think that now that the queer community is so vocal, that kids are just kind of saying they want to be gay, just to be gay, just to be a part of something. And I noticed that with my younger brother, which happened with him when he was 12, when he said that he felt like he was bi. And one of my parents was like, "You're too young to be making that decision." And I was like, "Well, why is it just the norm for a child to be straight? Like, I think it's kind of odd that we just assume that whenever there's all these avenues, trail A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever the fuck you want to say." It's like we have all these avenues, and we're just assuming that kids are just still going to be straight. And I'm like, but no, like there's so many different things that they could be. And sexuality is something that we start experimenting with around teenagehood. And so for my younger brother to come to me and say, "I feel like this is who I am," and I'm like, "Great, cool. Like, I really want you to figure that out for yourself. And I'm glad that you're doing it younger, because the younger you do it, then the more stable and confident you will be in your adulthood in your own skin, which is ultimately what we should want for our people." And I think that when I saw the reaction from my parent where they were like, "You're too young to be making that decision," and I'm like, there's no age
And it's not even a decision,
limit
really, is
on.
it?
No, it really
It's just
isn't.
like
It's
a
just who you
statement,
are, pretty
or what
much.
we think we are at the time. And
Exactly.
if it's not, like, I think that just comes back around always to, if you're not hurting anyone, like, it's just not that serious, you know?
Not at
And it's not
all.
even like, it's not even a choice. Like, it's not like we make
No.
this choice and now that defines us for the rest of our lives. You could, you could, I could only sleep with women for the next 10 years, and then I could switch it up 10 years later if that feels natural to me, or vice versa. You know, it could, that could, it's just a decision. Like, even putting the word decision on something related to sex, like as like a identifying factor, just comes back around to how fluid it is, and how what we are defining as our sexuality today likely is not going to be what it is in a few hours, even, or in a few years when he really starts going through puberty and is in like an entire new era. Who knows what it will look like
I
by
know he's
then?
turning 14 already, and it's like now he's just kind of like, I don't really know, but like I'm not really in a rush to figure it out. But it's like I was really proud to be an older sister to see him 12, 13 being like, "I think that I might like boys too." And I'm like, "Okay, wonderful," because yeah, why wouldn't you want to just kind of experiment and figure it out? Because you're completely correct. I 110% believe that sexuality, this fluidity, this fan is opening and closing constantly. There's no rhyme or rhythm to how it's going to close and when it's going to. It's just going to. And I feel like the stigma that we still perpetuate around sex and sexuality, therefore, I'm glad to see it kind of opening it up and loosening a little bit. Like we've touched on how being raised in sex positive houses has made us feel this way about sex and make it seem like and make it and normalize it as such an as a natural part of ourselves, but also just as a topic of conversation, like what we're
Yeah.
here doing with the podcast and her book club and all this amazing things, like things like that. Like we need this more, because the more we have it, then the more people are going to feel confident enough and also just educated enough to talk about it and to
Mhm.
feel comfortable with it.
Yes, comfortable with it is something that so many of us are not, which is,
Mm-hmm.
part of the mission behind, I think, anyone who talks about sex and shares about sex. And talking about it can be hard, especially talking about not just acts of sex, but talking about who you are as a sexual being, whether that be what you desire, what you need, what your yeses are, what your nos are. That can actually be a lot more challenging than people might think. And so, for everyone out there who is taking the time to put that effort into exploring themselves and communicating about their sexuality and who they are as a sexual being, especially in the context of an actual sexual experience with another person, that is so valuable. And yeah, coming back around to being raised in a sex positive household, that is something I am forever thankful for. And yet at the same time, I have still had many eras of sexual shame, and I was raised to not have to feel that way, and I still absorbed it from friends, the people around me, school, just terrible. School in the South, just horrific
Well,
on that front.
yeah, because
um
they're like, sex education isn't actually about sex education, it's about teaching
it
abstinence.
really
And
is.
I'm like,
that
what's
doesn't that does not
going
help when people's
on?
bodies are naturally, yeah, being drawn to explore. And
There's no
yeah,
defeating the urge to have sex. Like, you're gonna want to have sex. I'm gonna, like, every 16-year-old is gonna look at someone else and be like, yeah, I might want to have sex with you. You
even if
want to
they
know
don't know what
why?
that
If
means,
they, yeah, exactly. Like, I didn't know what sex was. So I grew up in two different households. And one of my households was very, very awkward and dismissive when the topic of sex came up, and very encouraging of quote unquote abstinence. And I remember being a kid and hearing that and being like, what why? That's stupid. It's like, abstinence sounds stupid. But also, I didn't even know what sex was. Like, for the longest time, like, I didn't even know there was a hole to put anything in. Like, I
yeah.
genuinely didn't know what I was talking about, what I was thinking. I didn't know what to think, because the lack of sex education made me so, what's the word,
In the dark,
ignorant.
ignorant, in
There
the
we go.
dark, yeah.
And so, because of that, it wasn't until I went to my other household that I realized that this is a natural part of ourselves, where, as much as we encourage young people to go out and travel or meet people or go to that really, really big state school, because you don't know who you'll meet and you don't know what the experiences you'll have, as much as we encourage people to take risks and do things such as those, we shouldn't be encouraging them to do that sexually, because it's the same thing. It's just you're communicating it and going about it in a little bit different of a way, but it's still doing the same thing for you, and that's enriching you to being the best version of yourself. And so, sexuality, bringing everything back to that and this encompassing thing we're talking about today, without sexuality and understanding what we like and how we perceive ourselves, we cannot be the fullest version of ourselves. But there's
Yeah,
just, you can't get from A to B without it. That's
absolutely.
what I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, if we are shutting down this part of ourselves that is so prevalent, whether we like it or not, we are made from sex and we are here because of sex. And if we are ignoring that part of ourselves or not choosing to look at it, even for just a moment, and be aware of who we are in this aspect of our lives, it it does have effects even if you don't realize it, and it does keep you back from feeling the most whole that you can feel within yourself. That doesn't mean you have to go out and have a million sexual experiences to be in touch with your sexuality. That can mean masturbating, that can mean just being aware of that turn on and that energy you might feel. And so yes, it's so
That
important.
could even mean celibacy. Like, for
Yeah,
some people, it's like the act of not having sex and halting the physical connection helps them learn about themselves sexually even more, because then that becomes a very internal piece of work. It becomes just a you thing, and then that's whenever you learn about yourself in just multiple different avenues, where it is, you don't actually have to go out and have sex with someone to be a sexually engaged and active human being, and understand yourself sexually and understand your sexuality.
absolutely. Yes. I love that reminder. I took about 2 years of next to no sexual experiences, and I learned so much about myself and about my sexuality. So you don't have to always be in experiences with another to explore and learn things about yourself. And with that being said, of course, there's some things that you can't fully learn on your own, or things that you can't heal without being in relationship of some kind to explore. But yes, whether you're on your own or with a long-term partner, or in between the two, there is so much to explore and learn about yourself and about your partner, if you're interested in learning about your partner's expression of sexuality as well. And kind of, I guess, a final question, unless we go really off on a tangent, which we can if we want to, but what does it mean to you to respect your sexuality? What does it mean to respect your sexual self?
I think that just giving your sexual self room to talk and breathe and grow. I think that's the only thing that you can really do, because we talked about how it's so fluid that it's just constantly going to change. The mood swings are heavy with sexuality,
Yes.
and that's for men and women. Like, it's just not, it's just how it goes, because as our life experiences move around and as we experience different things, things are going to fluctuate within ourselves. And the only thing that we can do to properly respect and elevate and our sexual self and our sexuality is just to give it time to make mistakes. You know, maybe you regretted sleeping with that guy at the bar. That's okay. You gave your sexual self a second to let loose, to experiment, to see if this is what you liked. And that's okay. You gave yourself a second to breathe and just try something. And if you don't like it, then don't do it again. It's just kind of, I think I hear a lot of people who will stigmatize or put themselves down sexually when they make a mistake, quote unquote, with sex or with how they choose a partner. And I think that that's just, there's no, you can't go back in the past and change anything. And I just think that's so harmful. So whenever I have someone coming to me for advice and it's around this realm of sex, I'm like, you just have to give yourself some space just to make a mistake or just to live, honestly. Like, there's no rhyme or reason or rules that we have to follow just because everyone's journey is their own. Um, I don't know. What do you think about this?
I love your answer. Yeah. Um, I mean, for me, I think respecting my own sexuality is doing my absolute best to be in touch and aware of what I want, whether that means in a sexual experience or just on my own, just kind of be in touch with that part of myself and acknowledge what comes up for me. Especially, we're not getting into this today, but in the realms of eroticism, that is so vast and there is so much within that that we might not quote unquote like, or so much that it can be considered taboo. And if we actually shield ourselves away and don't want to look at those parts of ourselves, that ultimately comes back to haunt us or hurt us as well. But without getting too far into that, yeah, I think just acknowledging your yeses, acknowledging your nos, communicating and advocating for your needs, your wants, your yeses, your nos, always coming back to that, and being as safe and mindful as you can, as always, is so important. And I think education is also a really important part of respecting your sexuality. So, whatever that looks like for you, whether that means reading a book, listening to podcasts, exploring courses with experts, anything that feels right and supportive for you to really show this part of your self respect and show this part of your self love.
I completely agree with you. Because I also think that in terms of sexuality, once again, like, that's how we perceive ourselves and that's how we're communicating. And in terms of the act of sex, your sexuality is always your own. It's never anyone else's. Even though you're having sex and sharing that experience with someone else, what you're bringing to the table is still your own, despite whom you're doing it with. And so I think that's really important to note here, just because when we're having sex and it's what we're bringing to the table, it's what we want and what we're giving, that's our own. And that's only going to ever belong to you. And I think that action is just the best way how we can respect ourselves and how you can also kind of maintain your peace, because anytime a sexual mistake or anytime something is said or done, um that's what I always like to tell myself, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, this is for me and only me. You know, what you're giving and receiving, it's for you, it's for to enrich you. So that's what sexuality is. It's like a constantly enriching process.
I love that. You're magical. That
Ah,
is so
stop.
cute. So cute. Oh my goodness, Alex. Well, yay. I just love that. You're so that is so important. Yeah, it's your sexuality is yours. It belongs to you, or it is a part of you, however you want to look at it. And yeah, you don't have to let anyone outside of you affect that. It's ultimately boils down to yours and whatever you want your sexuality to be, look like, feel like. all the things. It is in your hands and in your heart and in your pussy and in your penis or whatever you have going on, whatever you want to think about right
And
now.
your left tit, your right
Right
tit, even down
eyebrow,
to your finger,
your toes.
your toes.
Yep.
People put down kink so much, and I'm just like, it's their truth. Like, that's what they want to do. Like, if that's what's calling out to
Yeah.
them, like, why are we putting that down? Like, yeah, if you want to kiss some toes, go kiss your toe.
You're awesome.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
awesome.
Ah! Well, do you have any final insights that you'd like to share today before we
I don't
log
know.
off
I
or
think
whatever?
I think we can log off now. I think we've said so many things. I loved
Yeah.
listening to your points.
I love listening to your. I love just listening
Oh
and
my
hearing
gosh.
and talking.
Sorry I talk too much, guys.
She doesn't talk too much, guys. Well, it was fabulous having you here with me at the
Thank you so
Shame
much
Free
for
Sex.
having me.
Thank you for being here. This was my first in-person podcast interview, as anyone who's been tuning in knows. So the lovely Alex. And for all of our listeners today, thank you so much for showing up for yourself and taking steps to embrace your most shame-free self. And to everyone out there, stay sexy, stay safe, stay curious.
Stay sexy is very important.
Yes, stay sexy. Take care.